Hey everybody, and welcome to a new video. Today I'm gonna be giving some recommendations for fantasy books by Asian authors for you guys to give a go. These are definitely books that I have already talked about throughout the years, though for some of them it's definitely been a while since I've actually mentioned them, so it's definitely nice to go for a repeat, I guess. And then there's also one book that I've just finished that I think definitely deserves a spot on this list as well. So, without further ado, let's just go into it. The first book that I'm going to recommend is definitely new on my physical collection, but I have read the first book a very long time ago, and I'm actually absolutely due a reread because this is the only series that I'll mention here that but this is the only series that I will mention here that I have actually not finished yet. And that is The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. So Andrea Stewart also does have a more recent trilogy that she is working on, of which I have read the first book, which is The Gods Below, which also had a very interesting world building. But today I'll talk about The Bone Shard Daughter, as that is a series that you can already fully dive into. So the Bone Shard trilogy is a 3-book series in which we're looking at an empire that basically has been ruling for a very long time. However, their rule is kind of losing power, and so basically they have to kind of protect their dynasty, so to speak. We are following the daughter of the emperor who, through some mysterious illness or something like that, has forgotten a lot of her memories. And her father and basically their whole dynasty have lived off of this magic that is known as the Bone Shard magic, and she is trying to figure out how to make this magic work, as she does not have access to the teachings about this magic because her father prevents her from having so. I think, if I remember correctly, also people have to donate a piece of bone. Every inhabitant of the empire has to donate a piece of bone, and so basically these bone shards are then animate it into creatures or something like that. I remember that I really enjoyed the world building a whole lot within the first book, but I will have to admit that for the second book, for example, I don't really remember anything. That's nothing against the book, because if you are a regular on my channel, you know that I have a horrible memory, so I'm very much looking forward to diving back into this trilogy and getting to experience all the things anew again, and I now have the full trilogy to dive into and be able to finish out this time around. Another full trilogy for you to dive into is the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. This is the first book, Jade City. So this is a urban fantasy looking at sort of Yakuza families and the battles in between them, and basically these families are mining jade because there is magical properties to be gained from the jade. So we have different family members that we're following in here, and there are different roles within the family. You have sort of the warrior figure, and then the woman figure is more sort of left to the administrative side of things, let's say. But we also see roles changing throughout the trilogy, and I love the Greenbone Saga a lot. And actually this video is just making me realize how much of these books I just want to reread at some point. The problem is just that there's so many books, so little time, so I'm never rereading, it seems like. But maybe I have to make time for it, but I guess we'll be rereading the Bone Shard Empire soon, so probably Greenbone Saga is not going to be anytime soon. Another trilogy for you to dive into is Chinese-inspired fantasy. This is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. R.F. Kuang, of course, is very well known at this point in time, and the type of literature she writes now, I feel, is very different from The Poppy War. The Poppy War definitely feels like a much more sort of traditional epic fantasy in a Chinese setting compared to some of her more recent fantasy works, but that could also be due to the fact that, her more recent works have been standalones, and so the type of storytelling that you do in a standalone book is very different from the Poppy War trilogy. But I definitely hope that we are going to see us return to a trilogy like this again, because maybe The Poppy War is actually still my favorite book by R.F. Kuang that she has ever written. In this one we're following a girl who's basically not that well off, who joins the army during, I'm actually not entirely sure during which time in Chinese history. And it is basically about her sort of brutal desire and ambition to survive and thrive throughout the period in Chinese history. Though I think it's a time of the Poppy Wars, right? It's a time of the Opium Wars. So it's a lot of political intrigue when it comes to this one. And the character of Rin, who is our protagonist within this series, is definitely one of those protagonists that is not sort of like a protagonist that you root for because you recognize yourself in her, not necessarily. It's actually a character that a lot of people will hate a lot of the time. And it's also one of those series where you don't necessarily, like agree with the protagonist all the time. The protagonist is not always the good guy. The protagonist does make decisions that you will be like, are we really going there? So I definitely love this particular fantasy series, but if you are somebody who always needs to be rooting for your protagonist, then this is not going to be the trilogy for you. Next up, probably one of my favorite fantasies of all time is A Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. This is a Japanese-inspired samurai-type story in which we are looking at an older protagonist who is basically looking back on her past life to some extent while she is raising her children in traditional Japanese society. She and her husband are basically this sort of like power couple who are from different families who basically bonded together in what we can consider a political match. There isn't much love between the two of them, and he is very cold towards her, and we see her very much as the withdrawn, supportive wife who basically is just quiet and just like stepping to the side most of the times. And we follow her family, her husband, her children through a troublesome time within the Japanese history. And I love this protagonist. There is a scene in this book that lives rent-free in my heart, in my mind. Like, as I said, I have a horrible memory. I can never unremember this particular scene, and I wish I had more time to also reread this. I mean, it will happen at some point, right? I will reread it at some point, but yeah. I have to give some honorable mentions now, but just because just talking about these books have made me remember that there are some books on my shelves that I didn't even think about bringing with me. So first of all, I want to mention She Who Became the Sun by Su Lin Tan. Another one of my favorite books. This is a duology, so definitely one that I would also highly recommend if you've read all of these, for example, and you haven't read She Who Became the Sun. Definitely give that one a go as well. Then there is Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong. This is a book that got a lot of dislike when it was published. A lot of people who were reading it felt very unsettled by the content of it and felt that it was very inappropriate. However, I think that was absolutely the point. So it is a book in which we're looking at body hopping. It is a competition book in which our protagonist will be not actually our protagonist, in which the contestants will be battling it out on this massive cityscape game. Our protagonist is doing so as well, but all of the other contestants will be hopping from one body into another, and that results in a lot of casualties, and our protagonist is actually the only one who refuses to hop into other bodies throughout the book. And a lot of people felt like that body hopping magic system was like super vile and like unethical, but that was the point. So I was like, yeah, I mean, that is the point. The book is not trying to tell that this is amazing magic and if only we had this possibility. So it just confused me a lot that there was a lot of kind of like dislike for it for that reason. The third book in this trilogy is about to come out, so even though the trilogy is not fully intact yet, you can start reading it now and be caught up by the time that the new book is going to be released. And then the most recent addition to this list is going to be The Girl with a Thousand Faces by Sun Yi Dean, and this is a book set in Hong Kong, mainly in Hong Kong in the 1970s, but it is also going to be looking back at a time period 30 years earlier on some sort of a island. We are looking at our protagonist, who is this woman who has the power to talk to ghosts, and in this period in Chinese history we are looking at the aftermaths of the Japanese occupation of China, and this has unleashed a whole ton of angry, dissatisfied ghosts on the country and on Hong Kong in particular. And a lot of exorcists are making their livelihood exorcising these ghosts. However, she talks to them and figures out like what their restless spirit, why are they restless spirits, what is their unfinished business, and helps them come to terms with that and move on. Now, she on her end has some unfinished business as well, because she lacks a lot of her memories. She doesn't really remember what happened to her. All she remembers is being picked up by a boat at some point in time 30 years ago, but she doesn't really remember what came before, except for these dreams she sometimes has of somebody called Sea Sister. And yeah, that is all I'm gonna say about this. It looks at this period in time. We have a protagonist once again who is older. She's over 50 years. If you need the r/fantasy prompt, then this one definitely fits. And the sort of Kaigen I think would also fit over 50. I'm not entirely sure of that timeline, but I assume so. And this one is a book that heavily deals with the thematics of generational trauma, coming to terms with the harm that has been done, finding peace in a situation that, you know, has been unjust to you, to your country, to the people around you, and you know, like finding peace in that, in the sense of, you know, finding peace within yourself without necessarily having to forgive or receiving forgiveness. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one a whole lot. I definitely thought it was very well done. And so yeah, that's going to be my list of recommendations for fantasy written by Asian authors. And definitely let me know your recommendations. I have a few on the shelves at the moment. So currently I have The Rain Shadow Orphans by Naomi Ishiguro. This is being published next week actually, so I think it comes out a few days before this video is going to see the light of day. First book in a new series. Then I have The Last Contract of Isako by Fonda Lee, a sci-fantasy I think it is. And then the final one that I have on here is the Book of Leaves by A.S. Tamaki, which looks to be another samurai Japanese inspired book. So very much looking forward to that. And then I have the Bone Shard War here as well, of course, but I already talked about that series. But that is it, I think, in terms of Asian fantasy on my shelves at the moment. But definitely let me know if you have other recommendations, because I love exploring this type of representation within fantasy. Would absolutely love to read more of them. I have read more of them than the ones that I've mentioned here, of course, but I definitely am always looking for new inspiration for books to pick up within this cultural representation field of fantasy. But so yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you had some use of it. In case you are reading more than just fantasy and you want recommendation for Asian books within the literary fiction genre, for example, then I do have another video that came out before this one that was in which I talked through some of my favorite books with Asian representation within them, and so I will link that in the description as well. And so yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this and see you guys for the next one. Bye!